Ready to begin our conversation now with the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya, Dr. Patrick Njoroge. And when we're speaking about financial digital infrastructure, we're talking about how to move money easily through the system and how to make sure that we've got efficient provision of financial services. Dr. Patrick Njoroge, thank you so much for your patience and thank you for indulging us once again. Asante sana, and apologies for the technical hitches.
That's okay.
Great,
Good to
thank
be here.
you.
So delighted to be here.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So let's talk about, the journey towards financial inclusion. It is well known around the world that mobile money was literally born in this country in 2007, and we've been a world leader in this respect. But Dr. Njoroge, you are on record as saying that full inclusion goes beyond just access to payments, and that there is much more that we need to put in place towards ensuring and reaching full inclusion. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Yvonne, and again, delighted to be here. I think for Kenya, over the last 14 years, we've made remarkable progress in terms of inclusion. We went from 23% in 2006 of adults that were included that had access in to financial services to now last year 83%. So by any standard, those are remarkable numbers, substantial transformation. But as you rightly said, access isn't everything. And there are three general directions that we need to look at. First is to realize that there are still some people that are excluded. And these will generally be people who are sort of on the margins, maybe women, maybe youth, etc. And so it is important to work and figure out how to bring them on board. Secondly, you also have to begin thinking about it's no longer just access, it is usage and quality. And that is really where we are today. Frankly, this is a marathon. And maybe the numbers I gave you before indicate that we have done very well in the first 10 kilometers, etc. But it's a marathon. We still have a lot of mileage to cover. And so we need to deal with those things. So expanding services, indeed, usage by SMEs, women, etc., that is a significant element in terms of what we need to do. Secondly, another item is this customer centricity, to be much more focused on the customer. It's not about technology, it's more about the customer, satisfying customer needs. And finally, trying to expand the ecosystem so that we have greater resilience by, let's say, the individuals and households. There's a number that I find striking that is 2/3 of shocks that push people back, at least in Kenya and also India actually, that push people back into poverty are health related. So health shocks, and we are very much aware of that in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to expand into those services that provide greater resilience, and for instance, insurance. As you know, in our countries, Kenya and others, similarly situated countries, insurance uptake is actually at a very low level. So those are the directions that we are expanding. It's a marathon. We need to continue running at pace.
Like you say, it's a marathon. Now, can we talk about consumer protection for a moment? You've noted that that is one of the major issues. And we've seen that mobile money and fintech are growing rapidly, and that is challenging for regulators such as the central bank, and to continue to assure customers of their safety and protection from fraud in this space. So what trends have you noticed that concern you, and how does the bank plan to address them?
Okay. In terms of consumer protection, I think the one that we have seen quite a bit, or we have been talking a lot about, and consumers are much more aware of course, is the whole business of cybersecurity. They need to be sure that their funds, let's say in their wallet, their e-wallet, are available, are there, and they are not in any way tampered by some hackers, etc. Of course, there's a bigger issue. It isn't just the consumers, it's the institutions themselves. And the institutions need to be much more resilient, or much more, let's say, protect themselves much more to attacks. Now, one of the things that we have discovered, and I mean, this is not just in Kenya, it's around the world, is that the bigger risk actually is from internal actors that are in cahoots with, let's say, external hackers. So there's a lot of issues there in terms of, you want to call it governance or structures of separation of information, etc. That's an entire whole set of issues that need to be dealt with. So that's one. Cybersecurity, but hardening our infrastructure, hardening our, let's say, our infrastructure against those sort of risks. Secondly, you have, at least in Kenya and other places, you have the emergence of what we call online lenders. And these are very much predatory in terms of the way they operate, and in terms of, let's say, the way they approach customers. And they are not really following what you call ethical standards in terms of consumer protection, relationship with customers, etc. That is something that we need to deal with. It's not a problem just here in Kenya. It's actually a much wider problem, because, I mean, the way they operate. Now, the other problems that could also arise, money laundering, etc., but they are operating sort of in the dark corners. And it's important that we shine a light on them and bring them out into the light. And those that actually want to do proper business survive. Those that don't want to, that prefer to stay in the shadows, well, that's fine. Let them fall and move on. But that is an important element. Finally, there's the issue of data governance. This is now the new issue that is at the table. Because customers do have, and they generate in their transactions, etc., they generate information, data, and also data about themselves. And what is the governance structures around the data that is generated, and how is it protected? Who has access to it? Now, we are obviously moving ahead with various frameworks, and I think this is an area that is so important going forward, so as to protect the customer and not have malicious, let's say, institutions use it for their own ends.
Mr. Governor, to have a truly efficient financial system that is also inclusive, we need to build what is truly digital infrastructure. And so my question to you is, do we have one yet? Are we there yet? If not, what more needs to be done to get us there? And what will be the steps towards building a truly digital financial infrastructure?
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. From our perspective here in Kenya, we started off this journey 14 years ago, 15 years ago, and I think it is somewhat without, let's say, without looking at planning ahead. And so now we have to backfill and figure out what are the gaps, and see if the trajectory that the entire infrastructure is taking, what are the gaps that may emerge, and how do we deal with those gaps so as to have an even sort of infrastructure. So that's what we've been doing. Now, from our perspective in Kenya, the first thing is that the objective of all this is, of course, to push people forward in terms of the economic well-being. And that is underpinned in our Vision 2030. For instance, the whole business of inclusiveness, so that we have much more inclusion in the opportunities, etc. Right? So that is an important element. What also has happened in terms of the digital infrastructure, last year in May 2019, the president launched a digital digital platform, digital blueprint, a blueprint of our digital transformation. And this actually has 5 important elements, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but for instance, one of them is the digital government, expanding the services of government in the digital arena so that you can pay taxes, you can get your passport, etc. All those services need to be digitized. And importantly, also things like the courts, etc. And then also things like the digital businesses. We've talked about that a bit earlier, etc. So that is the blueprint that underpins our development. From our perspective, there are also other things which we are picking from this, which is the area of payments, the area of supporting a 24/7 economy, etc. It's a whole sort of, let's say, development, a whole journey that we have embarked on.
One of the key things about, that digital footprint and the digital blueprint that we are sort of embarking on as a nation, particularly here in Kenya, one of the ways is obviously, getting a digital identity. Now, we know in the traditional sense, that was something that was exclusionary, for a while. Government issued IDs, particularly to vulnerable groups like women. But now we're moving into the digital space, and the issue of, verifying identities is also something that will be important. And we know that around the world, there's many people who are working on establishing digital identity systems. Obviously, it'll serve 2 purposes, making sure that there is more inclusion and also to counter financial crime. But what would be the best way towards building a workable system of digital ID?
Thank you. This is something that is vital in terms of the digital transformation, a digital identity. And the identity just says that I am who I am, nothing beyond that. I am so and so, that's it. And this has to be me. And I am connected, let's say, to all the other services through this digital identity. So from our perspective, at least here in Kenya, we had an old identity system, and that actually had, it ran its course, but we now need an identity, or a new identity system that really can build on other, let's say, other things. And I mean here, for instance, much more biometric in its the information that it has, etc. So this is where we need to learn from other countries that have been on this path. And Singapore, for instance, and indeed other countries as well, have been on this journey for a while. But I think India actually is another country that has done remarkably well in terms of digital identity. So I think the first element is to learn from others. Let's not reinvent the wheel. But it has to be an identity system that keeps up with the technologies that are there, technological advancements, so as to, in fact, to stop, let's say, to make it harder for people to, let's say, steal, or should we say, change, alter somebody's identity, etc. So that's what I would say in a nutshell. But I think this is a journey that we are on, and other countries actually have been on, and I think we'll be on for some time.
Yeah, and learning from each other is I like that you said about that, not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but learning from those who are doing it and finding a way to adapt that. And I'd like us to stay on the issue of digital identity for a moment, because that's also very key for the know your customer requirements, and that's very important for anti-money laundering. But in some ways that can act as an exclusion for people and end up harming the innocent. So while we're still talking about the issue of digital ID and bringing in the KYC requirements, what solutions do you see when regards to technology and to policy to making sure that the KYC rules, the digital identity, will be used for good and will not likely harm, those who are innocent in this process?
Okay. So the first thing here is to appreciate really what you say, that KYC is extremely important, meaning know your customer. So any financial institution needs to know its customer. Now, when we talk financial institution, we also mean actually the telcos, because after all, this is all predicated on a digital sort of platform. So know your customer is extremely important. However, the point here is that it has to be risk-based. So, for instance, if it is somebody who is making all sorts of transactions, let's say in multiple currencies or large transactions, well, then the institution really needs to know what are the, needs to know not just the business, but the transactions, etc. There's a lot of knowledge that needs to be put there. Now, that shouldn't be that difficult, given that a lot of the information can be stored electronically, etc. It is in sort of a very tall order. I think here's where we need to use technology, reg tech, etc., to make sure that that is done easily. But I think the point here is that if you go back to, let's say, to the other side of the spectrum, where you have, let's say, a street, somebody selling fruit seller on sort of the corner of the street or whatever, or a lady who is selling some wares on the street. Of course, there's a KYC element there that the provider of the financial transactions, in terms of the e-wallet, etc., needs to know. But I think the point is that it has to be risk-based, and it shouldn't lead to exclusion. You shouldn't subject both of those to the same level of KYC.
That's right. At the start of this, we talked about, regulators keeping up, with a lot of the innovation that is happening. And in some ways, it would seem that, it's obviously the pace of innovation that happens quite rapidly. And there is a challenge with regulatory bodies such as the Central Bank of Kenya and others keeping up with that. And that's okay, because, the processes are designed to be slow and deliberative. But some can say that leads to some, sort of bureaucratic challenges. What do you think would be the keys to making sure that regulators develop a culture and a policy that, moves in line and in tandem with the innovation that is taking place?
Thank you. I think, speaking for all regulators, I think we've just had a bad rep. That's basically it, I think the point here is that regulators are very focused on, or should remain very focused on, the risks, meaning they need to understand exactly what are the risks that these new products or a new product are subjecting the financial ability risks need to be key. Now, they should be agnostic about the technology as such, right? Meaning when the things are brought to us, it's not the technology that matters. And unfortunately, some of us get, and indeed, thanks to some of the promoters, we get very excited about the technology side. It shouldn't be that. It should really be two questions: financial stability and all the other elements of the central banker's mandate, and also to ask the question: what problem is this product solving, from a point of view of the people? Because after all this is premised on the premise that we are solving people's problems. That's why we are doing what we are doing. So the regulator should not be in the business of pushing down innovation. On the contrary, is actually asking those hard questions. And then, walking that journey. So I really think regulators should be the most innovative people of all, because they understand exactly what it is and really are willing to ask those questions and subject whatever products, whatever innovations that are brought to them to these questions, and walk the journey, as it were, with the promoters. Well, Kenya, actually, we were the first to do this we called it the test and learn approach when M-Pesa was brought to us. Nowadays, there is the new word sandboxing. That's a word that I think we did sandboxing before sandboxing was invented. And in a sense, that is what I would say in terms of the regulator.
Yes, so your final advice to other regulators such as yourself, I like that you say you were doing sandboxing before it was even called sandboxing. And it reminds me of something that Jason Bauer said in one of our sessions yesterday, that if the pace of change outside your organization, outweighs the change of pace within your organization, he said, then the end is nigh. And you're talking about sandboxing even before it was a thing. So what would your advice be to other regulators? And I like that you said it's that you should be at the forefront of innovation, but it's beyond the technology itself, but what it does and the ethics, I suppose, behind it. So what would you say to other regulators who are watching us from around the world right now?
Okay, I think the first thing I would say is we are on this journey together with the innovators. Let's first appreciate that the objectives are similar. The reason we are in this business is for the shareholders, or should we say all the stakeholders, our population around the world. So in some sense, we have common objectives, and we have to appreciate that. Secondly, let's learn from each other. We have learned from other regulators. As I said, we've been working, for instance, with the Monetary Authority of Singapore and other regulators around the world on specific things, not just on things that are very close and dear to us, like, let's say, the CBDs and things, but other things as well. But I think that's what we need to learn from each other. Thirdly, is just to realize that in your own area, you have to, in some sense, use your convening power. And I think the Monetary Authority of Singapore and ourselves are good examples of this, we should say, in terms of the fintech festivals and all that. This is really using our convening power and bringing people around, the innovators, providing space. And this is, I think, the way things will go forward.
Indeed, that's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. Some great words about learning from each other and using your convening power towards making sure that we are moving forward in the right direction. And indeed, thank you to the Central Bank of Kenya and the Monetary Authority of Singapore for putting this together. We're so glad to be part of this great event, part of 40 cities around the world, just convening here over the last couple of days to try and find solutions as we move forward and look ahead towards a post-COVID-19 world. Mr. Governor, thank you very much for your time here with us today.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you very much.